We are in Revit 2026 today, and as I mentioned on the very last bit of the last video, essentially you can go to Miro Google Drive and get your template file. Now it comes in as a 2024, however when you click on it, it'll immediately update to 2026. That's just kind of the nature of Revit. It is not backwards compatible. I cannot open a 2026 in 2024, nor can I save it down to 2024. So it is one of those programs where at least a lot of firms are kind of hesitant about usually upgrading. Like for instance, Lake Flato still uses 2020. Why? Because, well, they have some giant models still in 2020, and they're really afraid that if they update it to 2026, they might lose some things. In fact, they will, right? Because the programs are slightly different. From what I learned last night, 2026 actually has a significant GPU upgrade, right? Which is really great for my Apple Silicon that uses sort of a synthetic GPU core. However, it's really great for those of us who have, say, an independent GPU card, because for the longest time, Revit didn't read those cards too well, and now they do. And let me tell you, I was testing mine at home like, wow, right? I've never seen Revit kind of work like Rhino, if you will. So that has been pretty nice. However, you'll notice in the template file, I've already even given us a topography. However, I do want to go over first really how we'd make one of those. So let's just go ahead and start. In our case, I want to talk about the UI first, of course the user interface, and I do think there is something quite playful about it. However, the ability to not really type out the commands is a little bit of a difficult transition. I will say, you're like, where is that button, right? And you'd be constantly looking for some items in that regard. But in this case, it does try to structure it for us, so you'll see that there's tabs at the top. And this will look the same, of course, for Windows. Right now, your screen will look just like my screen. I do prefer a dark mode, so there's that. We have architecture, right? So we have walls, doors, windows, components, columns, roofs, ceilings, floors. And to be fair, a lot of this stuff is like already architecturally related. I mean, if you click on roof, obviously you have the soffits, the fascias, the gutters. Most of us probably know what a gutter is. However, how many of you know what a fascia is? Maybe not, right? Maybe some of us do, especially if you're in construction. What about a soffit? I mean, don't get me wrong, there's usually a little icon, and then if I hover over it, there's even a small animation that starts to depict what's going on, at least in terms of the program. However, Revit is for those of us who already understand architecture, which is usually why it's frowned upon, at least in the foundational stages of teaching architecture, because a lot of us know when we're teaching architecture, usually the first 2 years is actually breaking preconceived notions of design and really reestablishing good foundations, like design principles like we use at San Antonio College. In our case, we have a program that is already ready to make certain things, and don't get me wrong, if you're a deconstructivist, you probably don't work in Revit, right? Because a deconstructivism is about being non-architecture, it's being where a wall can be a roof and a wall, where Revit, that is not the case. It wants a wall and it wants a roof. It doesn't want you to be a deconstructivist. It's kind of a bad architecture joke. But regardless, we do have some more tabs. We have structure, so you can imagine this goes to a structural engineer. Steel, precast, so all the concrete stuff. Systems such as ductwork, electrical work, flex duct, MEP, so all the fire pipes. It does everything, the sprinklers. We're talking the entire building. And what it is known as is usually a BIM modeling system, BIM, for Building Information Modeling, right? So essentially the idea with BIM programs, and there is another one called ArchiCAD, which is gaining in popularity. I will say I do like ArchiCAD because it does run on the Mac. And it's more like somebody got Blender and Revit and put it together. And I got to tell you, it's pretty cool, right? However, ArchiCAD just isn't popular in the States yet. I don't know what it is. It's predominantly actually in the East. Like we use Revit, they use ArchiCAD, right? That being said, though, we have some more tabs. We can insert things such as other files. We can merge CAD files, link topographies, IFCs. I don't even know what those are. Annotate. You're gonna love annotations, right? You never have to draw an arrow in your life again. Analyze. Don't get me wrong, we're not going to get into any analyzing, but in my grad school we definitely did a lot of analyzing, like that 16-week Revit course that we had. We did solar studies, we did heat studies, how much of the building was going to heat in a certain area. You reduce the window, it literally tells you that it's going to reduce the temperature in the room. It is pretty cool, but definitely not what we need in a 2-year studio. Massing and site, we'll actually use that today. Collaborate, you won't use this probably until you go to a firm. And what's really cool about Revit is everybody can work on the same file at one time. We're talking the whole firm here. We're talking the MEP engineers. We're talking the plumbers. They can all work on the same model at the same time. Wow, what a great way for it to crash, right? And it does all the time, especially if one of those guys' internets go out or something happens, right? You lose a lot of stuff. It's an absolute mess, but it's fun because everybody else is also in that same mess. Views, we'll definitely get into that a bit. Manage, there's a lot of options here. Add-ins, we won't get to that much. And modify is definitely something you use pretty much every time you click on something. However, I have started us off, not at ground zero, but I've given us a couple things. So again, we have our tabs at the top. To our left, we have our properties. And you'll notice this window actually changes every time you click on something. So even the view has properties, and if you click on something, it has different properties, right? So keep in mind this property view usually changes a lot, and by default, sometimes our project browser is actually also on there. I like to split it up as I explained in my last video. But in our case, that brings us to the project manager, or the project browser. I usually call it a manager. I don't know, it may have changed names in the past, but I did import a DWG that I drew in Rhino, right? It may actually look familiar to our exercise 4 project, right? If you take a look, it almost looks like that portion that we did before we lofted, right? So don't get me wrong, we can use these programs for the best of their abilities, just like we used Illustrator, and it's normally referred to as our architectural workflow, right? So just in case you ever hear somebody say that, hey, what's your workflow? You're like Adobe, Revit, and Rhino, right? Is essentially what they're asking you. However, in our case, I basically imported, right? And keep in mind, just like anything, you can only actually make stuff one-to-one. Revit, it won't let you make other scales. In fact, you might find out at the bottom, you'll see that there's every scale. In fact, you can change every viewport to just be a scale. That is quite the game changer. We do have quite a few options here as well, like such as the detail level, whether we want that to be sort of a rendered view, very similar to our pull down window in Rhino, where we choose shaded, rendered, ghosted, things like that. So again, a lot of familiar things that thankfully, since you've learned Rhino, you'll start to realize that there are definitely some similarities when it comes to digital vocabulary. That being the case, I gave us a few things such as our sheets, right? So if you've taken Tech 1 or Tech 2, you know about we name our sheets a very certain way. And you'll definitely learn more about that in Tech 3 when you move on to the next college. However, I wanted to start us off strong and basically do a couple things for us so we don't have to get into the minute, really boring details of making stuff in Revit, but everything is basically a catalog system, right? In fact, you will see this little tab right here called Families, and if you click on it, it has every loaded item in the entire project, right? If it was building information modeling, the architect needs to be able to talk to the engineer needs to be able to talk to the plumber needs to be able to talk to the electrician. That way they're not putting two pipes in the exact same spot. In fact, this program was entirely invented to mitigate errors, right? And so far it actually has, and it's actually kind of a funny story. If you look back in the 60s, all those drafting tables, if you actually go back and look at the drawings, sometimes they're completely wrong, right? In fact, they'll say like, oh, this measurement is 60 feet. It's actually 64 feet. The guy didn't get that inch or something, right? And we have a lot of discrepancies even in construction, and even some stuff where now it's kind of made a stereotype. Architects don't know what they're doing, right? As much as engineers that check themselves maybe 3 or 4 times, especially back in the day. However, a lot of that has been mitigated. So, I mean, literally we have all the floors available in the entire file. We have all the flex pipes, and I've definitely loaded a lot of these things for you. Keep in mind, if you go to a firm, they're going to have a lot of this stuff for you too. They're going to have the title blocks already loaded. They're not going to expect you to make your own title block. Whereas maybe in your master's program, maybe so, especially in that 16-week class. However, this is some of the stuff that I like to show, and what's cool is that it's its own component and it gets loaded into a piece. So if I double click on it, you'll notice that it is its kind of own item. It's its own category, if you will, and I can of course change those things all I want. I can even load my own title. So for instance, let's get some text in there, and let's call it CCV for Christopher Charles Verrett. Now you'll notice I can't just like change the size of stuff. Like, this is where it gets annoying. Even the fonts have different categories. So for instance, I can only do one size font right now. If I click on this font, if I click on modify and click on this font, I can of course go to my properties and choose some different fonts. In my case, I've loaded some for us that are a couple of different sizes. To be fair, we could also click on this and edit the type and start to realize, well, text size, I can control that to say an inch. So don't get me wrong, there's a lot of stuff we can do. In my case, not always easy, right? I mean, gosh, I wish I had Gumball right now and I could just make it a little bit bigger, but Revit, that is not the case. It wants to make sure and quantify everything. It literally knows there's like a list in here somewhere where you can say, how many text items do I have? And it'll tell you 1,508, right? Don't get me wrong, a lot of programs are trying to get this way, but as soon as we actually finish that, I have to load it into my project, overwrite my existing piece, and of course start to see the changes, right? So again, we're adding to this big file, if you will. Again, I'm trying to lay out the concept here because at first glance it can seem like a very confusing program, but think catalog and loading things like catalog items, and obviously we'll get into that more. However, I have loaded some sheets for us, so you don't really have to worry about that too much. However, let's go ahead and take a look at today's assignment. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in our week 8, and let's go ahead and talk about it a little bit. So let's go ahead and post that and put it up. Documents, SAC, computer graphics, summer, and exercises, Revit. I'll go ahead and drag that to you. So sweet. This is our final project, thank goodness. And seriously guys, give a pat on the back to yourself. It is not easy taking this course in 10 weeks. So definitely deserves a pat on the back and a nice break. However, we're definitely talking about BIM introduction. So for this project, we will dive into the many components of the user interface of BIM modeling software Revit. The point of this project is to get familiar with BIM modeling software and to practice the required skills needed for the practical world in the architectural field, right? I can't tell you how many times you go for an interview, they're going to ask you, how good is your Revit? And now, after this class, you can say, I'm pretty comfortable, right? You don't have to lie and be like, I'm a master at Revit, but you can definitely get your foot in the door and go, I'm willing to learn, and I definitely understand the components of BIM modeling. You could say BIM modeling, they'll be like, oh, they do know something about Revit. So consider yourself the client for this project. You will first start by selecting the topography and site, and to be fair, I've loaded one for us. You can definitely make one yourself, of course, knowing your Rhino skills. However, so let's see, the studio itself will be comprised of a relatively simple design and will be noted for creativity in the project, but is not the focus of the rubric. Each project in whole should fit within a 50 by 50 by 50 volume. So again, ballpark area here. I'm not trying to make any mansions. I'm not trying to make any tiny little houses either. Your studio will require the following. And again, these numbers are very vague. So some sort of living space, some sort of studio space, kitchen, 2 bedrooms, and that's more like a total. That's a lot of bedroom. Bathroom 100 to 200, and of course some sort of display area, right? So don't get me wrong, we can get creative with this, we can have some fun, and I think you definitely will, but let's do some sort of residential space. After all, we don't normally get to do anything residential in our first 2 years, and really all of architecture years. I never did anything residential until I got to choose in my master's program. However, each of your designs must have at least 1 stair and at least have 2 or more stories. Don't get me wrong, if you want to go 4 stories, go for it. I mean, you want to make like the cool treehouse? I mean, why not? Topography and setting up the model space in Revit is a first given, and we'll go over that today in the template. Please use the provided via Google Drive, right? Next, we will explore the various beginner tools and methods used within Revit to complete the project. Obviously refer to this tutorial video. A couple things to note is we only have like 7 days. So again, I'm not trying to master Revit here with you guys. but again, enough to get started and to be well equipped for that first architectural intern interview. So keep in mind, the final is really actually due completely digitally. Unfortunately, I'll be in Paris and grading them in Paris, so obviously it'll have to be digital. We won't actually be printing these out, and thank goodness, because each sheet is 24 by 36 inches, and that might actually cost us a bit of money. Relatively speaking, we're going to be coming up with the construction drawings of this little studio house. Again, not really, but we do want to be as practical as possible, right? And really treat it like a construction document. And this may be very well your first time even hearing the words construction document. So I do want to express some stuff. This was made pretty easily, actually, in Revit. So we took the actual model, we made a detailed view, and then simply you can actually move stuff. You can start to gumball things, right, in Revit now. That was not an old feature, by the way. So it is really nice to see all these programs kind of competing with each other. Again, that's why I theorize that eventually they'll all be the same and they'll create one world architecture program, which is called Architecture 1. I don't know. I'm throwing random names out there just in case I actually nail it on the head 10 years from now, but that's just me. So let's go ahead and get started and really just talk about the 3D model. This is one of those programs where we're not actually designing the floor plan or the section or things like this. Again, often why some professors say no Revit whatsoever. However, I do want to throw out there that there's some good things about Revit. Its ability to produce drawings from a 3D model is awesome. I don't have to do clipping plane. In fact, it almost seems like it's doing a lot of stuff automatically. But in that case, when it comes to 3D models, I definitely work a lot in the 3D view when it comes to Revit. A couple things to notice is we do have this view box. That is pretty sweet. When you click on it, it does change the view. Not gonna lie, there is a plugin for Rhino that does this as well. Again, copying Revit, right? You even have a stair creator in Rhino. Plugins like this that you find, again, that are already built into Revit system. So, yeah. You can, yeah. So the question was, how did I get this here? Great question. Yes, I would export it as a DWG. I'd select it, export only the selected. And keep in mind, one thing that I'd want to reduce the amount of layers, right? So I just want to make it one layer that I choose from, which of course you'll see here. But a great question. I'd turn it into a DWG first. I would go to import or insert and actually link or add that DWG. So I can either link it or import it. Right, so of course that's what I did here. Keep in mind it's going to be the actual scale, so if you accidentally did something 6 by 6 inches, it will come in 6 by 6 inches. There's no way to change that. It really does automatically know the units, which is great actually in many cases. But a great question. So what do we do from there? We just got our import and we want to turn it into a topography. We'll go ahead and actually click on this. We'll go to massing and site and we'll select Topo Solid. Now you'll notice there's a drop window and actually a couple of options. In our case, I don't want to draw it as a sketch. It's honestly a lot harder than you think. Not impossible, but I do want to create it from an import. In my case, I'll click on the import, right? Or, sorry, create from CAD. So I want to click on that and it immediately brings up the layers that are in that DWG file. Now in my case, I'd want to turn off the setback, the zero layer, and the trees. I don't want the trees to be involved in the topography, right? I just want those topo lines. In my case, I'll press OK. Voila, just like that. It's almost like it magically lofted it together. However, it has its errors too, right, to say the least. It's really actually a point system. So by default, it'll turn into an object. However, to modify it, we'll have to click on it. And we'll have to go to modify sub elements that's found in that modify tab. You'll find that when you click on something, that modify tab pretty much automatically comes up, right? If it doesn't, you will have to just click on the modify tab. That being the case, I'm going to click on modify sub elements and you'll see that it's actually a series of points that were generated based on those lines, right? However, if it didn't have a way of knowing, you know, it kind of just defaulted as a 0. Now that's great. I can still use my same tools. And you'll notice when you do enact something or highlight something, it turns blue. You can change that accent color as well, but by default, I do believe it is cyan, especially in dark mode. And you'll see that it defaulted as a 0, 0 point, right? So we need to change the elevation of that. Well, I may not know where I want to change it to, so I may need to highlight this one and go, well, I'm just going to copy that real quick. So I'm going to click on it, Command C, and I'm just going to copy it and change those points. In fact, I can change multiple points at a time, so I can hold Shift and add to my points, or sorry, Control, and really change that. Now, since they are different, you'll notice my ability to change them one at a time went away. But you can change things one at a time. Sorry, it's moved a little bit in 2026. It's a little bit over here. You can either change it here with your little arrows, right? So it's got a little bit of gumball, right? I can't move it this way or that way, but I can move it up and down. So don't get me wrong, there is a manual way, but I could also select that point and actually go right here and type in 0, 0. So in my case, well, more like -31 feet. So that's looking pretty sweet. Now you'll notice that there's a couple of different colors going on here. Obviously the points are blue, and we have this green kind of exterior line, and you'll notice it kind of messes up too. It didn't really find the points and things like that. Now I know it's extremely annoying, but I'll have to click on Modify to get out of Modify. I'll double click on my piece and I'll actually change the boundary. Again, why they're not together I have no idea, but I just want to go over the steps a little. I'm going to actually delete one of these lines just to show you what happens. It doesn't let you complete anything if that boundary isn't complete, right? And you'll notice it brought up a window that says error, right? It even says lines must be closed loops. Very often Revit is trying to help you solve your problems. However, there's still no AI involved, and honestly it's going to be awful the day AI gets into Revit, but it's probably an inevitability. But in our case, I'm going to switch to my top view, which keep in mind you can't do anything until you actually address your errors. So I do have a couple of options. I could just quit sketching altogether. I could just give up, right? It's kind of hilarious. Or I could just really continue and fix my drawing. If you do quit sketch, it'll basically revert back to what it originally was, which is sometimes great, but most of the cases not. In my case, I'm going to select my top view and fix it, right? So in my case, items are pretty editable, right, in Revit. So, I mean, don't get me wrong, I can move things around. It's not exactly ideal, and it brings me to some of my first commands that I can do in Revit. So, don't get me wrong, I have given you guys the cheat sheet up towards the top. So if we go back to Miro, man, I put that little guy somewhere. Oh, there he is. Don't want to lose him. But I put a list of the commands as well. Gotta say, this is a pretty good one. If you go here, you'll see that the commands, I have no idea who made these, but they're hilarious actually. Align dimension, DI. No idea, right? Detail line, that makes sense, DL, right? Text is text, okay, yeah. Some of these do make sense, right? Load, LO. But you'll see that actually the commands are based on a 2-key sequence. So if you hit any 2 keys, honestly, at a given time, you can accidentally mess up your Revit. But I will say some I've definitely memorized over time, right? Such as WT, TR for trim, certain ones that you definitely start to memorize. But I did want to put these out there because it's not a bad idea to print these and kind of highlight the ones that you realize you kind of want to use or utilize. That way you can start getting used to it. However, if we go back to Revit, you'll notice that I can trim stuff, but the way trim works is weird in Revit. It's a fillet, a chamfer, and kind of an extend tool all in one, and trim, right? It does kind of all 5 commands in one command. So that's TR, and basically what I want to do is basically tell it I want this one and this one. So in my case, hopefully it's still TR. Maybe it's not. Is it not? Let's find out. Did they change for 2026? That's gonna be crazy. They've got to be the same hotkeys. Let's find out. Is it the same for 2026? I can also search, so if I do Command F, I can do like a TR. See if there's any TRs mentioned. And there's not. What? Maybe I'm thinking TD? No? Oh my gosh. Did it change? What is Revit trim command in 2026? Yeah, it is TR. What the? Let's try again. Maybe we can't do TRs in like I said, I'm gonna run into stuff that maybe I can't even do anymore because things do kind of change. I also it could be because I'm screen recording. Did it go?
Just look at the top, modify.
Ah, okay.
So I like it.
Yeah, but I should be able to actually modify in here. Essentially what you do is when you hit TR, it'll let you click on the line and click on an, oh yeah, never mind. It just wasn't enacting. I think because of the screen recording. Just keep that in mind. Usually it pops up like something like, oh, you're in trim mode now. Mine might just not be doing that, or it might have changed. But notice what I did there. Let's go back for a second. I clicked on the 2 lines that I need to touch, right? So don't get me wrong. This could have been more like, let's exit that command. And it's weird. You have to hit escape to exit your initial commands. You'll also have to select the line to modify. It's very annoying. Again, kind of a learning curve between Rhino and Revit. But this line can be extended too. It's going to automatically trim it. So if I do TR and I click on the parts that I want, right? So I want this side, not that side. It'll take that side. However, let's try that again. If I take this side and that side, sorry, TR, this side and this side, it'll cut it the other way. So again, it's kind of being smart, but honestly, if you didn't pay attention to what you were doing, you might not actually get the result you wanted. Let's see that again the right way. TR, taking the part I want and the side that I want. Puts those together just nicely. Now when I hit check, of course it completes it. Sometimes you get an error regardless. Sometimes it's a yellow error. I love yellow errors because you don't have to do anything. You don't have to fix anything. It's just telling you, hey, I don't like you, right? Or I don't like what you did, right? So basically it just says, same slab, slide, edit, vertices, delete because the floor, roof, or topsoil has changed its shape. Okay, well, relax. You deleted a point. Thanks for letting me know, right? But I definitely don't mind the yellow errors so much. But that's looking pretty good. You know, we maybe got like a creek side element to it going on, so we can definitely start designing. Now, one thing I would say for this project, guys, is you definitely want to sketch something out first, right? You want to use your skills that you learned in D1 or D2, D3 or D4, and you definitely want to sketch this out first. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised that you can probably draw it in Rhino real quick, right? At least a basic idea of what you want to do. And quite simply, you can even trace it, even better, right? And funny enough, tracing stuff in Revit is actually kind of fun because you can click on the line and turn it into a wall, right? And maybe we'll get into something like that, but I'll kind of leave that as bait to obviously look into this program because there is a lot to do with it. But in our case, I'm gonna, you know, practice my design skills like I do every semester, and just design something on the fly. I don't recommend it. It's not very easy, and you run into a lot of errors, as you'll see. I'll be running into some errors today. I don't really like these points way up there, but again, as you can see, I do have to move them one by one essentially. So again, Revit is meant to be a construction platform, or at least was. They're slowly trying to make it more of a design, sort of mass modeling platform, and it is really cool with stuff that you can do in Dynamo. And don't get me wrong, this is meant to be really more basic, not so much like all the advanced things that you can do in Revit. But as you can see, it's one of those programs where it's not really adaptable, is what I should say. Unlike Rhino, where I can change it on the fly, I can wire cut it, I can do all kinds of stuff to mold and shape and do things. Or like even Maya or Cinema 4D, where you're really trying to make the essence of a character, or Blender, where you can sculpt things. Anyway, not the same kind of program. So they're different, to say the very least. However, I'll hit escape to escape that piece. And obviously it got one of those lines up there. That's why it was so high. Now for our case, I'm going to build the floor plan in floor plan. And I do want to go over a couple things because you'll notice, hey, there's nothing here, sir. Right? You'll notice that our views and our sheets are 2 different elements. I can put the views on the sheets, right? And, well, as you can see, it's kind of like in AutoCAD where you have XREFs and you have page view versus sheet view, kind of the same thing, right? Our modeling space is our model space, and our sheets are really our paper space, right? If you're familiar with that kind of terminology. But very often I just call it sheets, or sometimes even refer to it as my paper space because, well, it's going to get printed, right? So in that regard, we have to actually drag the view, so those floor plan views, onto this piece. And you'll notice by default, I got some of my topography, but I can't really do anything to it, right? Besides maybe move this viewport around. You'll notice a couple of options. When I click on it, I can change some of my viewport titles, right? So I've made one that is titleless for you, just in case you don't want the title. And I've made some that, have a title, just in case you automatically want a title. Again, those are kind of nice. You can't quite literally forget. What's really weird about Revit is you can't move this thing unless you click on this part, and you can't move the line unless you click on this part. Again, I have no idea who makes these programs, but there's some weird things like that that are definitely noticeable in Revit. However, when I double click, I can change the view and I can actually work in this view. And you'll notice a lot more things are editable, such as the viewport itself. Maybe I definitely want a little bit more space. And maybe I actually want something more close to the project. I think my floor plans are asking for, what is my floor plan asking for? 1:4 scale. Awesome. So let's go ahead and just do that right off the bat. I'm going to click on it. You'll notice I can switch the view scale to 1:4 scale. Scroll up a little bit, bam, and you'll notice that it automatically changed the entire drawing. In fact, it got so big that it exceeded the 24 by 36 I even already gave us. So let's double click and refine that a little bit. I kind of want to build my house on this flat part, so I'm going to generally more or less put my area over there. And we don't need that much. Again, I'll double click, move that out, and move my title separately. If I want to make that line a little bit bigger, or if I do want to change maybe the text size, again, this is where it gets kind of tricky. I've got to click on the viewport and change actually that view. Don't worry, I went ahead and made one that's a little bit bigger for you anyway. That way you can see it and everyone can see it and we can all have a good day. However, you can either double click on the view and you can work in this view, or you can work on the sheet. Again, it's kind of preference there. I was always taught to work actually on the sheet. I just find it easier, kind of killing two birds with one stone. And let's face it, we put sometimes multiple views or multiple details. And if you've ever seen construction documents before, you can have multiple things, multiple views on a single sheet, explaining one thing. So in our case, let's start with the floor plan and make it easy for today and just work on the viewport itself. And in our case, let's go over a couple things. Like I said, I'm designing on the fly, so I do apologize for that. But it is pretty cool. So I'm going to make a studio and I'm going to start with my floor. Of course, Revit wants you to start as if you were building the project for real, right? So what do? You excavate the topography, you build the foundation, then you make the walls, then you put windows in those walls, then you make the next floor, so on and so forth, right? You really start at your foundation. You wouldn't start at your roof and go down, would you? You'd have a floating roof, unless you are, what's his name from San Antonio? Henry Ford. You know what he used to do? Does anybody know about this? He used to make actually the second floor, and he'd make it in concrete, make the whole thing, and then he'd lift it up with two cranes, right? And he'd lift it right in the air, and he'd have the workers build all the first floor walls, solidifying this floating wall. I mean, it's actually pretty unique construction. And you can find a lot of these houses actually right near Incarnate Word. So just in case you're interested. But that be the case, let's go ahead and start drawing our floor plan. You'll notice I have a lot of tools, and I can even, like I was telling Bernardo just now, I can import one of my DWGs that I just drew, and I can even select lines. So you'll see that there's an option to pick lines and turn them into walls. So for instance, I don't necessarily want that to turn into it, but I could technically click on that DWG that I had, right? Now I've hidden it for today, again, to kind of help us in the template a little bit better, and I'm just gonna draw it. As you can see, I can just use a polyline. And what's really nice is as I draw, it tells me the measurements, it tells me the angle. And what's really nice is if I hit tab, I can actually change those things, right? I can actually flip to them and quite literally type them in. So for instance, if I type in 5 feet, enter, it'll keep that angle. Another thing that's really nice is once I click, it's very editable as well. In fact, if I hit DI for dimension, I can automatically do a dimension. Pretty nice. And what's even nicer is it stays in this view mode. So if I say I wanted that, the dimension goes away. I don't have to see it, right? So that is kind of nice, especially in a construction document environment. However, I do not want a triangle building today because I do not want a headache in Revit. Revit likes really simple stuff, which is why, again, there's a lot of turmoil about using this in studio. In my case, I'm just going to design something pretty simple. I'm going to go with maybe my entry, maybe a 10 by 5. And again, keep in mind I can always change these numbers later too. So I can just kind of ballpark it. And maybe my living room / studio space, that's looking pretty sweet. I kind of like the square, so I'm going to hold shift and make it square. So like something like a 13 by 13. I know I'm going to have some stairs because it is required. Maybe I use this kind of space right here. That's kind of sweet. I don't know, I kind of want to pop out there. I don't know. I kind of like the broken geometry kind of thing. Maybe I have a restroom off to the side. Again, I'm kind of designing on the fly. But from here, I need to do a couple things because if I hit check, it's going to be like, hey, you can't have crossing lines. You can't have open stuff. It needs to be all one piece, especially one at a time. Now, don't get me wrong. I think actually Revit does this thing to where you can actually have two like separate boxes, but they have to be closed. That is a pretty new feature because for a while it didn't do that. However, I can't just use trim here either, right? So again, you have to address the errors. You either have to continue or quit sketching. Never hit quit sketching. You're not a quitter. Just hit continue, right? But in our case, I think you're going to see that trim doesn't always work, right? I'm going to hit TR. I'm going to hit these two things. And it's going to get that one, but it's going to take it away from here. It works here. And what's nice about TR is I can continue just clicking. So don't get me wrong, I actually laid mine enough to get one piece. Now again, what's really nice is I can hit DI and I can dimension this guy all day long. In fact, I can get multiple dimensions involved. Put them off to the side. And even better, when I click on the dimension line, I can go, actually I want 9 feet. And that's really nice too. So again, I can use the dimensions to actually control the object. Which, let me tell you, a lot of my architects that I worked for, this alone blew their mind, right? And it's a huge reason why we use this technology for construction documents. It's accurate, right? And there's no way buts about it. It's accurate from the very beginning, right? So I can take these items and dial them in, such as like I want that to be actually 4 feet, 5'9". Maybe get the overall. Maybe it shouldn't exceed 50 feet. I mean, I need at least 50 feet by 50 feet by 50 feet. So maybe I'd want to double check those things as I was drawing. Don't get me wrong, drawing in Revit is really nice compared to Rhino. So what could I do? Could I make 2D this? It already is 2D, right? I can print it out and use it, right? So don't get me wrong, there is a way to use Revit in Studio, but it's by saying that you didn't use Revit. Now, I'm not saying to be a liar, right? But I'm just saying use the tools for what they do best, right? But in my case, I definitely had some professors like, how did you make these all so accurate, right? And, I told them a little bit later after they gave the grade, right? Because they said no Revit allowed, that I used a little bit of Revit, right? That I used those tools, but then I went ahead and drafted it on top of it, or you can export DWG from Revit. And again, turn it into a model or whatever you want to do in Rhino. So I think it's really proficient that our students actually know both, right? Because again, we kind of go back and forth between them, especially when some work better in some cases and some don't. How am I on time? I have about 30 minutes. Beautiful. Let's get some doors, windows, and probably end on some stairs and components today. So we got a floor. Now what? All right, we hit check. Sustainable. Do we want to save the project? Probably. So let's go ahead and save. And you'll notice from the get-go, it's kind of like, okay, well, what did that do? You might have to even look at it in a different view. Like I said, I often actually work in a three-dimensional view because I'm like, oh, wait, that's not what I wanted. It's way up into the sky. Which brings me to my next point. Everything is controlled in levels and usually has to be established first. Again, like I said, this would have already been worked out in schematic design, already worked out in master planning, already worked out in design development. Then they would put it in Revit. You see what I'm saying here? So all this stuff is really figured out. It is not a design program. You're not supposed to design in Revit. And I'm just going to call that out, even though some would argue with me on that. But that's usually kind of the mentality right now, at least until Revit gets a little bit better. Now, in our case, I'd click on that floor and I'd realize that I've loaded a couple for us, such as a 24-inch foundation, a generic 18-inch foundation, and a countertop, right? Because Revit doesn't have to know if it's a countertop or a floor. Floors make horizontal planes, so I use the program for, again, what it does best. I can't just type in box, and I can't just type in countertop. It really has to be its own category. It's got to be its own family, and really a catalog-like system. So in our case, I'm going to switch that to a foundation. Literally just click on it, bam, just changes, right? Keep in mind that anything actually within this category will automatically change. So again, a double-edged sword there. But in my case, I don't need it to be 3 feet in the air. In my case, I'd like it to be right at ground level. So I'm going to go with 0 feet. It should go down, and I may actually need to go down a lot further. In fact, based on what I know about scale, it looks about like 8 feet, which, let me tell you, it takes some practice. So I'm going to go with -8 feet. See if I nailed it. Oh man, did I type in something wrong? It's like, oh man, it's gone. That's okay. Overshot it. Let's go with -6. Same. Let's go with -4. Man, I really overshot it. So -4 is pretty nice. Starting to look more like a foundation. Another thing to keep in mind is when you click on something in Revit, it's going to automatically zoom select like we did in Rhino, right? Again, just clicking on the item automatically centers it to your rotations. The way that I'm rotating right now is actually using my middle button. So if you got used to Rhino using your left click, you're going to have to start kind of going between each program. It is kind of weird. You can change the settings, so just keep that in mind. It's your mouse settings in Revit. But you might be like, well, that's too much topography. My computer's kind of struggling. I'm going to click on the view and actually click on this thing called section box. So yes, we can do kind of an awesome clipping plane even within our model. So if I wanted to reduce the amount of stuff that I was looking at, and maybe you're just tired of the flickering, if you will, but we can control basically that outline and make it a little easier to look at. Something more palatable, like maybe, I don't know, like our study models. Like I said, Revit isn't really so built for speed. I mean, it is in like the program or like the commands that we're using, but man, when it comes to dialing stuff in, I've seen people take 13 hours making a door hinge, you know what I mean? But they needed to make all the door hinges for the project. They spent 13 hours making one so that all could be applied, right?
Like
So
mass production?
no, more like very specific hardware inside custom houses. I can't tell you how many times I've had to make custom designs for the cabinet workers. What do you want it to look like? Well, they want this 1800 style. Well, I'm either going to have to sit here and draft it, or I'm going to model it in actually Rhino, and then I'm going to take it to Revit so I can dimension it and annotate it better. So don't get me wrong, I use these programs like all the time in tandem, right? Maybe even too much, arguably. But I don't know, it's not a crutch. I just, some people ask me, how do you have such good work? I'm telling you, I use all the programs for their best abilities. Why not? Well, because nobody else is, right? And maybe they'll get on to me as soon as they watch these videos. But we got a foundation, and the first thing you might notice too is, well, I noticed that the foundation is actually inside this floor, and you may actually want to remove it. So in my case, maybe I want a basement, maybe I even want to go down. So let's figure that out first, because, well, like I said, we're going to have to establish our levels first. And I have done some of the work for us. So if you go to elevations or go to your elevation view, you'll notice you don't have any, right? So let's go ahead and make an elevation view. Where do you find your elevation marker? On a floor plan, right? So again, the more you know about your piece, and in our case, it's like, oh my gosh, it's disappeared. What do I do? Not to get really into the craziness of Revit, but essentially what's going on right here is, well, I have a view area, and I accidentally pushed it out of the view area. How would you know that? Well, you'd have to be an experienced Revit person like myself, where you sat here for hours like, where did it go? And eventually you start to realize, well, let me use actually my hidden tool and go, well, where is it? This will show actually everything that's being hidden. In our case, it won't show things that are past the view though, right? So again, sometimes helpful, sometimes not. In our case, what we'll have to do is go to our visibility, right? So you'll notice there's a couple of options in our view. And in our case, we have the view range right here, and depth, clipping, and that's a good sign, no clipping, so it's not going to clip anywhere. But if I go to edit, you'll see that, well, I reduced it to a -4 feet, right? So I'm gonna have to change my view level to at least match that, right? So I'm gonna go with like -4 feet. I'm gonna go ahead and apply and see if it changed anything. No changes. Let's go to my bottom. So I'm gonna associate with that with -4 feet as well. And voila, right? So the view clip had to actually move there. Now, unfortunately in Revit, it doesn't show you that in this view, right? So again, Revit can be extremely confusing. Just want to point that out. If you run into some errors, check some things out, right? Maybe even study some of these things, because view range is kind of an obvious one. Where is the range of view? In fact, if you let it hover for a second, it tells you what it's doing, setting our bottom point. And that's what I did. I set our bottom point to -4, and now it found that piece again. So again, very different than Rhino. But that's pretty good. We got our texture, we got things automatically loaded, we got a deck floor and everything. But I need some elevation views. So I'm gonna go to View and go to Elevation, right? So you'll see Elevation, and we have a couple of options. In our case, I've already loaded some again for you, right? I call it an interior elevation. That way, it's not too big. And you'll see that it's gonna automatically do some things for us, and maybe not, right? In fact, sometimes you actually have to click on these manually and delete ones that were automatically made. In my case, I want it to face the right direction. You'll notice when I click this, it automatically made a view. So what's kind of crazy is now if you go to L over here, you'll see there's an elevations tab. And as I click and delete, it's actually making new ones automatically and deleting them automatically. You'll see that when I double click on that blue, it automatically brings up the entire piece. Again, really nice, but not well defined yet. Of course, I put in some levels for us, and you should start to see your topography. But at first glance, you might be like, man, what the heck am I looking at, right? You'll see that there's a DWG file, so we can hide those things, or we could type in HH, automatically hides things. Now, it turns it into a temporary view mode, so keep that in mind. As soon as I close the project and open it again, those views or those hidden items will essentially come back. If I want them to come back, I have to go into my hidden view, click on it, and toggle that element, right? So switch it back to that view, right? So in my case, it'll come right back. Oh, gotta actually click on it, I guess. I can't unhide it? What did I do? Well, I don't want to delete the layers. You can hide layers specifically. Again, there's a lot of options here because it's a construction document program. Again, just kind of want to make that aware that if you're running into a lot of issues, it's because it's not creative like you were just used to in that last project. So we do have our viewport, right? So we can control that, and you'll see that I put some levels in here for us, such as roof, 4th floor, and to be fair, you can actually move these around. So there's my floor. So I don't need all of this. Let's just isolate our view. Maybe I do want a bunker today. I don't know. I've always wanted a bunker. So I'm going to go with my low level, and I'm just going to hold shift to make sure it's straight. And again, you'll see that it's automatically changing the dimension there. It is pretty cool, right? However, I can also click on it and say, well, I want -12 feet or something. And it'll go exactly to that. Another thing that I like to do is DI for dimension again. And I like to set my dimensions. I think I'll make a 3-story building this time. I'm going to go ahead and delete these 2 for today. Again, those are views. Those are section cuts that would actually be floor plans. So it's going, hey, do you want to delete those? In my case, yes, right? Those were given, don't really need them anymore. And you'll see they'll be deleted from those levels, right? You'll see that you also automatically have a ceiling plan. Most of us don't even know what a ceiling plan is yet. But we design everything when it comes to the buildings eventually, right? We design where the light should go, where the projector should go, where all these little pieces of crap, that seem actually not so well designed, where they should actually go. But in our case, we do want a piece underneath, so I'm going to go with that. I'm going to say my first floor is actually -4 feet. That way it kind of lines up with that, and you'll see, oh crap, did you guys see that? It moved my floor. Why did it do that? Well, if I click on the item, it's based on my first floor, and I told it -4 feet from my first floor. So what should I do if I move the level -4? move it back up to 0. And now it's at the right level again. Same spot. Again, just a very different way of thinking though, right? I mean, you really have to almost think like a computer for Revit. It's kind of strange. In our case, I can click on the lines as well. Those are its own component, and I can move them. Usually if I move one, it moves all of them. For some reason, second floor wasn't attached, but they should be attached for you. And again, pretty nice, right? It's already looking like a construction document. It's already showing us -4 feet versus -12. Actually, that might need to be a little bit lower. Let's go with -14. And oh, dang, I can just make a copy. Oh, sorry, can't just type in copy. See, I'm even used to Revit, or sorry, used to Rhino. If I type in CC, that's how I copy something. So CC, click, and set a new one. Now, what's really weird is about this new one, I'll click on it and it says it's based on a second floor. Why? Because I clicked on that second floor line. If I don't click on it, it'll be assumed based off of that first floor, and it'll say above 10 feet first floor. So again, be very careful, because what's nice about this program is the client comes back. There's a huge construction change, hear me out, right? They now want 20 feet on the first floor instead of 10. In AutoCAD, I would lose my shit, right? Because I'd have to draw every single view over again. I'd have to stretch everything. I'd have to do all this work. In Revit, all I gotta do is move the floor. And if I move that level, let's say to 20 feet, everything attached will now stretch and complete, right? And what's really nice is I can go to all the different views, and again, they're already parametrically connected, right? I didn't have to do any work there. But we'll leave that at, I don't know, 12 feet is pretty cool for a loft area. And I may want to change it up by the time I get to the top, so I don't know. I'm going to leave that open to interpretation. But we do have our first floor, and you may see now we don't have a second floor. Oh man, what do we do? So we'll go to View, we'll go to Plan Views, and we'll go to Floor Plan. Simple enough. We'll click on it and go, hey, I want my second floor. Sounds good. In fact, nothing will be there if I didn't establish those levels first. However, let me show you how you add a level. It's very easy. You go to Architecture, and you go to Level. I know, some of these things are actually really hard to find. But eventually you start to actually memorize where everything is. So I will say there is quite a learning curve. And there's a lot of stuff I can do with this. I can turn stuff off, turn stuff on, and you'll see automatically it tries to help me out. Keep in mind I've used this template a while, and I do this a lot, like adding another layer, and I'm already at level 15. Obviously it should have just went to level 4, but again, as long as I double click and switch that to level 4, it's even going to automatically change it in that leveling layer. Obviously I don't need this new one. I want a new floor, so I'm going to go back to Floor Plan. Is that a tree? What the hell is that? Get out of here. We'll go back to View, Plan Views, Floor Plan, and make our second floor. You'll see that it automatically makes a second floor, right, and brings us to that window. Right, so if we double click on that view, right, it's right back. You'll see that one is blue though, right, and that's because it's indicating that it's already on a sheet. So like for instance, maybe I want to show my first floor and my second floor. So I'm gonna move my view a little bit. In fact, you can hide this view as well. Like, so if you don't want that white line, you can double click, and right here you can say no, I don't want the crop. Right, what's kind of hard is you don't know where to click outside of the box though. And maybe I want my second floor as well. Super tiny space. Right, click on it. Obviously we'd want to change that to a 4 scale. And eventually, honestly guys, this becomes a lot of second nature, and you're gonna have a huge learning curve. I know I did, where I felt like the program was in control, not necessarily me anymore. Whereas on Rhino, I felt like I had a lot of control. I could just type it, or I could just edit, undo. Sometimes you can't even edit, undo things in Revit, and it's very annoying, right? You feel like you just gotta delete the thing and start over, and I'd be right there with you. Keep in mind, I've been doing Revit for about 10 years now, so you know, I'm a bit of a natural, right, I will say, and I do often make it look a little easier. But be very aware of how I'm clicking on stuff. If you gotta pause and kind of see like, oh, we clicked on this first, to change that, and he clicked on this first to change that. Don't get me wrong, I'm not the best explainer of that, which is why I give those Revit videos as well, because there's people quite literally paid hundreds of dollars of hours to teach this program, and it's good money. But they do that with actually all kinds of programs. So if you're actually more interested in programs, I don't know, maybe that might be a route for you, kind of doing exactly what I'm doing today. But we got our first floor, we got our second floor, and we'll even see that some of those even stayed along. Now, since my viewport is not being able to be seen, let's change that. You'll notice my viewport automatically gets rid of things, especially if it's outside the viewing angle, right? You'll notice it doesn't seem like my elevation markers are there. I might want to check, where are my elevation markers? I don't see them, right? And it could just be because of the level that I'm showing. Could be the amount of stuff that I'm showing too. So for instance, I can control many things. So for instance, if I undo the crop here, it'll show the rest of what should be showing. If I type in VG, which stands for visual graphics, I can really control the crap out of this, right? Now, I don't want to get so much into this today because at first it could be really daunting. I don't want to scare you away from this program, but I do want to explain it thoroughly, that it has the utmost options. VG is like the illustrator of every viewport, right? And then you can copy your settings that you do and establish in each viewport. So again, we'll get into it. Honestly, this is like the first part of probably like, I'm gonna try to go for 4, right? 1 this week, 2 next week, or probably go for 3, right? 1 on Monday and 1 on Wednesday again. So not a whole lot of Revit tutorials here. So again, a lot to explain. So again, keep cognizant of your options. Just click on stuff, right? I mean, you can't do any wrong. You can see what stuff does. You can hover over certain things and it'll actually tell you, of course, what it's doing or what it does. So that's looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and make some walls, some stairs, some windows, and call it a day. Another thing that's really nice is I can double click on the middle button and it's going to automatically zoom select as well. Pretty nice feature there. So I need to make some walls, and I do want to make sure I'm on the first floor plan. I'm going to go to my architecture tab and make some walls. A couple of options here. I can just like click, right? So I can just click on there and bam, 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 bam. So I mean, don't get me wrong, it's not trying to make it any harder. Got some walls. However, you may have noticed it like added it to the outside. That's not actually what it should have done. And you'll notice it's a very thick wall. And very thick lines, by the way. There's a huge line weight going on. Now it's trying to show me what it would look like printed. However, if I hit TL for thin line, it'll turn it into more like a CAD drawing, where no matter how much I zoom, it's going to stay the same thickness of digital line. I don't know about you, but I definitely prefer thin line over, you know, especially when I'm trying to select a line there. It's like, I don't know what's underneath that or above it. So thin line is usually helpful for me. You'll also notice that we already have a construction-like document. It's already post-shade. It literally has everything already a part of it. In fact, if you click on a wall and you go to edit type, you can see that if I edit the structure, I can literally, I have the softwood lumber in there. I have the gypsum board on the outside, and I have brick or stone on the exterior. In my case, I have gypsum wall on both. That's an interior wall, and you're welcome. I gave you actually a couple walls that I just made. So if you take a look, I used to work for Elizabeth Haynes, and you know, that's the EH if you're wondering. I made a bunch of stuff for her. I was the Revit guy of her firm, where I just sat all day making stuff in Revit, making walls, making foundations, doing stuff that she would normally do for her construction documents, which was great. It taught me a lot about construction, right? But in this case, you know, I can click on a wall too, and I can instantly change this wall, right? So if I change it to an exterior wall, right, it's going to automatically change that whole wall. If I hit spacebar, it's going to flip this wall, right? So again, maybe not what I want to do today. And I've already got it wrong. I put it accidentally on the exterior, and you'll see that my exterior stone is on the inside of my building. Oh no. So let's go back real quick. And yes, it is going to go back one at a time. Sometimes that's great, sometimes not so much. And you'll see that WA also makes a wall. So if I do WA, again, a short command for wall, I guess that one makes sense. WA, wall. I don't know why they didn't do WL. Who knows? But in our case, we do actually have some options here, right? So if we go over to, well, it used to be there. Oh, there it is. Location line. So it says finished face exterior. In my case, I want the finished face interior, right? I want the wall to be built on the inside. So I'm going to choose that instead. And don't get me wrong, I could just actually select these things. And sometimes even that's actually easier than selecting lines. You'll notice I have my O snap automatically in purple, which is pretty nice. So don't get me wrong, I mean, we could do funky things too. But keep in mind, it wants to construct this. It wants to make it a construction document. I mean, imagine if you did your, did anybody take Graphics 1 with Balderas or Bohuslav? And you did like your name and your letters and your shapes. Can you imagine doing it in this program? Which is usually kind of the exercise that you would do in a first Revit tutorial. But again, it wants a finalized drawing, so it's going to try to make it finalize as much as possible. It's even going to try to automatically put things together. I can also use TR still on everything, not just a line, right? So TR or trim is very helpful in some cases. Like for instance, right now, maybe I want to get that piece and that piece, but I don't want to sit there and draw it all over again. I can also just move things, right? I can use AL for a line and choose an alignment that I want to align with. Boom. So of course picking the spot and then choosing the piece that I want to meet that spot. But we're looking pretty good so far. We got some walls. Let's check it out in 3D. Holy! We got a lot of walls, right? So not exactly what I wanted. And you'll see that by default, it usually actually goes to something, right? So by default, usually it's unconnected to a level, and usually defaults at like 20 feet. So what you're seeing here is 20 feet of wall. Now, what I would like to do is select all those walls. So I'm just going to select all of them and make sure I got them all. That looks about right. And I want to set them to a certain level. Maybe I only want them to go to the second floor, right? Or maybe I actually want them to go down into that basement level that I established earlier. So in my case, maybe I actually want it to go down. So my base level, I'm going to say actually my low level. So you're going to see that it goes down automatically. I don't have to move anything. There's no gumball involved. It's all numbers. And in my case, I want that to be connected to my second floor. Boom. And just like that, it's connecting to those already levels. Now, hear me out. I'm going to do WT real quick so that you can see all my windows, just so you can kind of see this in real time. What I'm doing here, and of course when you do a lot of stuff in Revit, it's like, please save, right? Because honestly, Revit it crashes more than Rhino, let me tell you. Especially when you're like, you move something that you weren't supposed to move and Revit, too many things were attached to it. I've really messed up some files. You remember that I was saying we can all work on the same file at a time? Man, it just takes that one intern to like fuck it all up. It's hilarious, and it's a field day of laughter, but definitely a waste of money in terms of business. But luckily you can edit undo and it all goes back sometimes. But in that case, where was I? Oh yeah, let's save it real quick. So let's just put it on my computer. Well, maybe not my computer. Let's put it on my desktop, just so I don't lose anything. But in my case, I'm going to click on each of these and just double click. That way you can kind of see what's happening here. I want to show specifically my my elevation here, right? And I just want to show you as I move these, everything is moving in real time. So that is what the game changer of Revit is. When I change one drawing, you'll see the floor plan change. You'll see the first floor plan change. You'll see everything change. And again, normally in AutoCAD, we would have had to draw all those out. I mean, you literally had this guy working on floor plans, this guy working on elevations, this guy working on sections. Now one person can do the entire project. Don't get me wrong, that means less jobs. Or does it? Or does it mean we just actually focus on different things when we're in school or have different training? They're already trying to answer this question with AI, right? I mean, people losing their jobs, especially if they're in administration, where technically, their job could be essentially done by AI, right? And it's a very scary world because what's unfortunate is they train that AI on them. You think they would get reimbursed for being replaced. I don't know. It's a scary world. However, I was actually doing some research last night and realizing every single one that I listened to, the one job they said does not get replaced is the architect. You know why? Because we still have to live somewhere, right? And that'll never go away as long as they keep us as humans. I mean, don't get me wrong, you could go Terminator style pretty quick, but I don't think that's the case. In fact, I saw this TED talk about actually all the security that they're adding to AI to make it, for instance, if you ask, show me a doctor, it's usually going to show you a white male. AI is racist, right? And there's actually trying to make it a little bit more universal. Like, why isn't it showing the doctors in Russia or Japan or Mexico, India, all these different places, and saying this is what a doctor looks like? So don't get me wrong, I think there's some huge changes within the next 10 years, and likely not so much in Revit, right? What I'm trying to say is, I don't know how you could make AI fix this stuff, right? It like doesn't even work as running it as a human. But you'll see that there's a lot of things that are sort of AI inspired. They're interlinked, they're interconnected, and we often call it parametrics in architecture. However, we have about 3 minutes, so I'm just going to lastly add some windows, and we'll continue next time. This should definitely be enough to get started. And again, keep in mind, the first thing you need to do is design the thing, sketch it out. What do you want your studio to be? And I'd almost do a design charrette, only give yourself an hour to design it, right? Again, we're not so focused on the design of it or what it looks like or how it works or, does it have cool bathroom, gold toilets? No, we don't care. What we do care is how well and effectively you're using the program, right? Are you coming up with all the components? And do we have a relatively nice construction document, right? So let's add some windows. So I'm going to type in WN, right? And I could really do that anywhere. Another thing that's kind of nice, I forgot how to expand my tabs. Can I do WT again? Yes. Maybe? No. Man, it just expands all the views. That's okay. However, you could still work in 4 views if that's what you prefer, if you're very used to Rhino. I do have some friends that they work on like every sheet at the time, and they have like multiple TVs so that they can look at all the views and see them change as they go. This program does get pretty intense, and I get why it's $5,000 a year, but a bit much for students if you ask me. And again, it's not a student program. So let's get some windows in here. Yes, I've loaded some windows for you. Some fixed windows and just, like a regular window. In my case, I'm just going to kind of poke around, kind of design the thing a little bit. Keep in mind this is underground, so I don't want to put any windows underground. I don't know, I like some big windows over here, and I'm kind of just randomly placing them. Why? Because I can just change it, right? As soon as I click on it, I can change the head height to say 8 feet, and it's going to automatically make those changes. In fact, I can even align to that, or again, just type in 8 feet. So if I do AL, and I say line me up to there, well, I can't line up to certain objects. So I'll escape, or click on modify. Why are you stuck? Oh, I accidentally added a window over there. My bad. But you can change everything individually and quite literally get things into place. I can also just move them, which is kind of a nice, don't get me wrong, it's kind of like Gumball. Obviously, I don't want the bottom. There we go. But we can use our arrows to move things too. So again, some things are pretty nice about this program. And what I mean by like a line is like AL. I would select that line and line it up with that line, right? If I wasn't finding the exact line that I wanted, I could actually flip through the tab. So if I do AL, you'll notice, well, what line are you talking about, Christopher? Do you want this line, this line? And if I hit tab, it's actually going to cycle through the multiple different lines that I can choose. So sometimes that's the best way to go. And we got a window. Another thing that's kind of cool, well, if I change this window, say, oh man, I want 6 feet windows. I hit enter. Well, if it's the same family, did you see that? It changed all the windows all at the exact same time. Again, a great game changer, not exactly useful in studio, but when you're making construction documents, it's great, right? Especially knowing that each window is the exact same and that when I specify them on a sheet, the person's going to make the right window, right? Which is obviously, like I was trying to say, we're trying to mitigate all the different factors that really go into construction. I'm not sure why my topography disappeared. Let's find out why. Man, where'd it go? Did I accidentally delete it? I may have accidentally deleted it. That's okay. We can always make it again from our topography. In fact, I could do that right now if I wanted to. So just in case you do, topography from import. That one. Enter. Oh, it doesn't want me to. Oh, the work plane of this view cannot be used for this operation. Now that's a fancy thing of saying like, that's a good thing to end on, is definitely work views. So you'll see that we have this ability to set the plane. This is your C plane that was in Rhino, but it's called our work plane in Revit. And a nice little animation is, well, what's really cool is you can change its direction. You know what's really not cool? That you can change its direction, right? Like, it can be extremely confusing. But what is nice is it's extremely changeable, right? So in my case, I can even select something that I already have. So like say the first floor. Okay, there's my work plane. It even shows it. And now I can probably turn this into something, right? It needs that work plane as a base level to know basically how to make the shape. If it's stuck on, say, an elevation, it's going to make my topography way different, right? So of course I set that work plane back to first floor, and I should be able to now make my topography. So not create by sketch. My bad. Well, now it lets me sketch it. But let's create from import. And from CAD. Oop, there we go. But you'll see, okay, no error now, right? The work plane is good. So keep that in mind. You know, your work plane can sometimes change when you're adding stuff to certain elements, or it'll automatically flip for windows. It'll flip to your vertical to add windows and things like that. But just in case you need topography again, sweet. Accidentally got rid of it, and you can get it right back. Although I did miss something, right? I accidentally have dirt, I think, inside of my place. Is that my first floor? This is the trouble of not designing first, right? When you're trying to design inside of a construction document. Let's go back to my elevations. Which elevation was it? Nice. Yes. So we do have some of this, I think, underground. Well, let's make that a little bit lower. Because why not? It's even automatically going to change my floor. And we're going to go back to my three-dimensional view, and I'm going to double-click on my topography. Because when I do that, I can change the outline. Now, as much as I can change the outside of the outline, I can, as long as it's a closed loop, I can change the inside too. So if I do want a gigantic hole, right, and maybe I actually want to open that up. Maybe I want like a skylight coming down. I don't know. Obviously, I'm designing on the fly. But let's say the hole extends there, there, and there. Unfortunately, there isn't an automatic close. That's looking pretty sweet, but as you can see, it's going to immediately make some changes to my topography, right? It's going to try. And unfortunately, what it did is it accidentally went down like 1,000 feet. So let's double click on that again. We'll change this to be a certain height, right? So in our case, defines slope. Oh, well, actually, I don't want that part. Please don't do that. Actually, I wonder what it does. About the same thing. I mean, never feel afraid to like test some of these things out. I mean, I know you can, especially when you're starting a program, you can feel like you're going to lose something in that regard, but that's how you learn. That's how you test these things, for sure. We should be able to set the height. Maybe I got to do it one at a time. Cantilever. What? It doesn't even make any sense. However, it doesn't look like it can actually change its placement. Well, things have changed a little bit in Revit. Let me see what's going on here. So I'm going to leave that the way it is and see if I can actually change. Remember, I have two ways of modifying the topography. So I'm going to try modifying sub-elements. I'm also going to get rid of my section box because I can't see anything to change. So I may need to exit that first, go to my view, uncheck my section box. It's going to load for a second. Oh, it doesn't even want me to. I don't think you can delete a section box, by the way. But it won't even let me. Oh, there it goes. Okay, so yeah, it went down to 0. That's the problem. So let's click on it, modify sub-elements, and change these points. Now there's my points for those pieces. And you'll see they went all the way to the bottom. So let's bring them back up to the top and change its elevation to, I don't know, -4 feet. And well, kind of went a little too high there. Man, I am off on the feet predictions these days. It's been a while. But you don't want to accidentally get other points, so I'm going to edit undo that real quick and try again, because it was a little easier to select all those points down here. And try -6. Fair enough. Right. I think you get the idea, right? And what's nice about this is we can switch back to that view or that section box, and you can get an instant section. What's nice about the section box is usually it automatically changes the size. And we can see what's going on there. It basically got rid of the topography of that section. But again, what's really nice is, well, now I can see it in my elevation section. Obviously I can't see it in elevation because it's not cutting through. But we'll leave it at that for today. Obviously just a couple things and way more to go over, but hopefully enough to obviously get started. Obviously the first thing being sketch this guy out, right? So figure out what you want to do. It can be very simple. It should be very quick. I would set yourself a timer and get started in Revit. Right? Any questions? Obviously, I know a lot of us working in the background on our previous project. So hopefully you don't have any questions. Right? Definitely watch the video. We'll leave it at that for today and call it a day.